We are returning yet again to another topic relating to Einstein, and specifically around the time of the dropping of the first and only nuclear bombs, atomic bombs that have been dropped in the so far history of humankind. This story, of course, relates and is somewhat adjacent to another historical figure who I've been studying as well. And it also therein relates to the title of an absolutely wonderful and incredible book written now in a time that seems so long ago, but we still ponder the concepts of war and peace as it pertains to our modern age. Now, Einstein as a figure can be thought of, I have been thinking of, as somewhat of a counterpoint, a contrast to evil, and specifically around the life and times, or the times around surrounding his life, and that of World War II, the antithesis of evil, the pinnacle of evil was that of Hitler, of course. And so, in my mind, I'm holding these two figures as opposite ends of a spectrum. And when thinking about how, in our modern current era, the era in which we live through, the life and times around us, I have been trying to think about what do you need to counteract forces of evil, and what do you need to make a world of peace. And there are some other figures such as Gandhi, who during this time, and he actually had correspondence with Leo Tolstoy, so that's kind of an interesting tidbit. Gandhi is someone else who I've often looked to as a historical example of how to try to come to terms with what peace means. But in this, we're going to focus on Einstein. And think about for a second how it would have felt to have been in his position with that context in mind. So Einstein, he wrote a letter to Franklin Roosevelt in 1939, which was later credited as having encouraged the development of the atom bomb, encouraged the Manhattan Project, and America to have invented the atomic bomb. And so Einstein was later discussed as the father of the atom bomb. You can see here his image on the cover of Time magazine with his portrait in front of a mushroom cloud with E equals mc squared written there as well. In the story, overseen by an editor, blah, 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 the magazine noted with its typical prose flair from the period, and here's a quote from the article written here in Einstein's biography, through the incomparable blast, and flame that will follow, there will be dimly discernible, to those who are interested in cause and effect in history, the features of a shy, almost saintly, childlike little man with the soft brown eyes and the drooping facial lines of a world-weary hound, and hair like an aurora borealis. That's the prose. Albert Einstein did not work directly on the atom bomb. That's the facts. But Einstein was the father of the bomb. That's an interpretation in two important ways. One, it was his initiative which started U.S. bomb research, the 1939 letter to Roosevelt. Two, it was his equation, E equals mc squared, which is a standardized equation that we think of when we think about science, but very few average people even can comprehend what a seemingly simplistic equation such as that means. I myself being one of those people, I can reference E equals mc squared as much as I want. I can wear it on a t-shirt. I can quote it on social media. But to actually grasp its significance, I'm just as stupid as the average person. But yet here it is, an oversimplistic narrative fed to the masses, which made the atomic bomb theoretically possible. Now that is all true, but imagine how you would feel in Einstein's shoes, being written about in such a way. Seeing the aftermath, the effect of a nuclear bomb uh, destroying the lives of tens of thousands of people instantaneously, which those people, in some sick and twisted way, actually had it better off than the people in the periphery that died more slow and painful deaths from the effects of the bomb, but not the instantaneous death being in the more center point of the bomb. That's a dark thing to ponder. Um, so this also relates to something that I've noted, which is Einstein's uh, what you can see in photos as something like rapid onset aging. You know, he really turned from being someone who, you know, he always kind of looked old ever since like his, what would he have been in 1920s? Would have been like late 30s to 40s. And, you know, he had his white hair and his fraying hair at that age. So he always kind of looked like an old man. But and of course, back then, the way people dressed, like you looked old by the time you were 18 years old, from our perspective at least, looking back. There's a great photo here from him being sworn in as a U.S. citizen in 1940, then a picture of him in 1950. And there's a marked change in his face. His nose droops, his the skin on his cheeks and his forehead droop down, and he just looks like a fundamentally different man, which of course that is the age of him going to in 1940 was 61, okay, or in 1939 when he wrote the letter to Roosevelt, he was 60 years old, and then in 1949 he was 70. So in that decade, from 60 to 70 years old, you go through aging, but I'm looking at both of my parents going through that era of their life, and they're aging, but it is not as marked as what Einstein went through during that time. And so you have to think, what else did he go through in that decade beyond just the regular effects of aging from 60 to 70 years old? Well, he went through essentially being not accused, but thought of in the public eye as the father of the atom bomb, which indiscriminately killed many innocent human beings and then put the world in this stalemate of, is that it for humanity? Is some evil person like Hitler going to get a hold of the atom bomb and just indiscriminately continue killing innocent people? What's the future hold of war and peace with the advent of the atom bomb? You know, this is a lovely book, and I've been enjoying tremendously reading it. Yes, it's long. Yes, there's lots of characters involved, but anyone can read War and Peace. I was under the notion my whole life that this is some massive book and some incredible work of literature, which it is, but it's so massive and incredible that the average person like myself, who doesn't have a PhD or something, can't really comprehend the book. Well, that's a total lie. It's a very easy book to read, and every 2 pages are insightful and interesting. But War and Peace in the early 1800s, written from the perspective of the late 1800s, is a lot different than what War and Peace means in the middle of the 1900s and up till today. So Einstein wrote another letter um, so Einstein didn't know all the ramifications of the Manhattan Project, but many of his friends and colleagues were involved in it, and he was smart enough to kind of realize what was going on, even though he was not privy to any insider information. And he talked to Niels Bohr, for example, who, if you remember from a previous video, Einstein and Niels Bohr were kind of at war in the sense that they diverge in their thinking of quantum physics, okay? But that shows that the theoretical thinking of physics takes a back seat when you think about the practical ramifications of physics, like the atom bomb. So Einstein was then talking with Niels Bohr, and they didn't care that they diverged in the thinking of quantum physics. What they cared about is they both were in agreement that if the atom bomb is invented, if a bomb of such magnitude can be invented, then the world as they knew it is going to fundamentally change. And there was a noticeable separation between the policymakers and the people involved in such a project and the world leaders in how that they would treat such a weapon once it was brought to being. And so Einstein was mostly left out of the conversation until 1945. Again, he got involved and agreed to write another letter to President Roosevelt, urging him to meet with, I always forget how to pronounce his name, Szilard. The S and the Z always screw me up, and other concerned scientists. And so he was encouraging, once again, the president and his team to meet with concerned scientists so that they could formulate a policy about how to maintain and manage such weaponry once it is inevitably invented. Roosevelt never read the letter because he died around that time. And the letter was found in his office after he died on April 12th, 1945, and was then passed on to Harry Truman, which, as is depicted in the Oppenheimer movie, was a fucking douchebag, pardon my French. And that's something that I've thought about ever since watching that movie and reading books around that historical time period, is how much different would the result of the nuclear bomb have been had President Roosevelt not died a few months before the bomb was dropped. Harry Truman, I ought to read a biography on him. Maybe he wasn't as much of an asshole as I think, and maybe he was depicted quite poorly in the Oppenheimer movie. I'll say that, perhaps. But nevertheless, he passed on that letter to his Secretary of State, James Brines, and he didn't really care. This says he was neither moved nor impressed. And the atom bomb was then dropped with little high-level debate on August 6, 1945, as we should all know that date, on Hiroshima, and then, 2 days later, on Nagasaki. 3 days later. August 6th, Hiroshima. August 9th, Nagasaki. August 12th, the Smith Report. The Smith Report was the official report about the story of how the atom bomb was made. And this, of course, was a formal report to inform the public, but it was also to control the narrative. And in so doing, it created the story, the mythology of how this was created. And as I mentioned, it listed Albert Einstein, in essence, as the father of the atomic bomb, because it assigned great historical weight of the launch of the project to his 1939 letter, and the underlying relationship between energy and mass that he had formulated 40 years earlier, being the genius physicist that he was. And it is, I think, a true fact that without understanding that, developing our understanding of physics in that way, we wouldn't have been able to know how to manipulate energy and mass in such a way to create a nuclear weapon. That burden is on his shoulders, but that is the burden of progress. Is that the burden of progress? When we develop new physics, is it natural that humans will then use it to kill and destroy? I don't know if there's some natural law that dictates that. I think that's, in line with the theory of stupidity, and that humans will be stupid in such a way as to use great power to horrible ends. So Einstein became associated in the popular imagination with the making of the atom bomb, even though his involvement was marginal. Okay? So he urged the creation of a project to explore the creation of the bomb because he was concerned, rightfully so, that Nazi Germany would invent such a thing. And then if they had control over it, that would be it, right? So, fair enough. He was never physically involved in the Manhattan Project, though. So, to be written in articles about the man who started it all, etc., etc. Imagine how that would affect you, and imagine how that would affect your biology. You know, the stress and the weight of such a thing. And so that's kind of just what gave me pause and what made me want to linger on this topic for a little while and to discuss it in a video here. I think it's a very profound thing to consider and an important aspect of our collective history and relevant to think about as we move forward. Okay, so Einstein from that point on dedicated himself to devising methods about how to come about world peace. And his ideas were for supranational entity, so like a one world government or authority that had a monopoly on military power. So I guess imagine a one world government authority that had access to nuclear weapons and that no other nation underneath it or within it had access to nuclear weapons on their own accord, versus what we have today, which is MAD, mutually assured destruction. So all nations, not all nations, but the big ones that have access to these weapons, including North Korea, which is random and insane, hold all of each other in nuclear assured destruction, which, yes, if one country launches one weapon, then the other countries will fire back and we're all dead. But also, if a mistake happens, that happens too. And there's the history of the true story of that Russian general who said no to firing nuclear weapons in response to a mistake that showed there was nuclear weapons being shot from the United States. So we're always one mistake, one misinterpretation away from mutually assured destruction, let alone countries actually wanting to destroy the world, people that are insane, maybe like Putin, for example, or Kim Jong-un, maybe these crazy, insane figures doing something suicidal for the whole planet, but also a mistake, a misinterpretation. And more, as we give military control and power towards AI, autonomous systems, mistake and misinterpretations that don't even involve human action as well. So we're in this insane state that means any given second of any given day, all of us could be wiped out, including poor innocent people living still in a different way than modern society in tribes in the Amazon, for example, or other increasingly less so places in the world that are uncontacted, but including those poor people and including all the animals and any other forms of life that live here on Earth, besides maybe the cockroaches, and the tardigrades. And that's insane. How do we get out of this? Einstein worked diligently to try to comprehend a way to rein in such powers, and he put in as much thought into this as he did into unifying physics, into coming up with a theory of everything, right? Which he never was able to do. He was also never able to come up with a theory of how to maintain world peace that was actionable and realistic, okay? And we're still in that same position. We don't have a theory of everything, and we don't have an actionable theory on how to maintain world peace. Therefore, we all need to pick up the slack, to pick up where the giants in whose shoulders we stand upon left us, and we need to continue to develop both of these things. And I think both will come about actually at the same time. A theory of everything, a grand unified theory of physics, which maybe allows us to not be limited by the speed limit of light, which, according to Einsteinian physics, tells us is the speed limit of the universe, which means it's pretty much that we're stuck in our solar system. There's no meaningful way we could ever get to any hospitable planets anywhere else in the known galaxy and universe throughout the cosmos, because we're limited by the speed of light. And so there's no practical way any of us could actually traverse to other planets. We're stuck with Earth, the Moon, and Mars, which The moon and Mars are pretty shitty alternatives to Earth. And so far as we live in a mutually assured destruction planet, any given day, it could all be taken away from all of us. So, do we develop a theory of peace that can unify the world so that we don't ever release nuclear weapons on each other? Maybe. Could we develop a new understanding of physics that allows us to traverse the cosmos in a realistic and easy manner? Maybe. I don't know which one is harder than the other, and neither did Einstein, because he died spending his life trying to develop a theory of both things, and he wasn't able to do either one. And this is the person which we quintessentially list as the smartest human who has ever lived, right? That brilliant genius scientist that we all think of as the quintessential scientist, right? That person was not able to do either one of those things and tried equally as hard on both of them. World peace, unified theory of physics, understanding the cosmos. Both are just as difficult, and I think we will only make progress towards one when we make progress towards the other. That's my theory about the world that I've worked on and been developing along the course of my wide reading endeavors, speaking engagements, etc., etc. So I'll read a few more things here and we will wrap up this video. Einstein envisioned a world government or authority that had monopoly on military power, which he called a supranational entity rather than an international one, because it would exist above its member nations, rather than a mediator among sovereign nations, which is, as you may be thinking, what the United Nations is. And throughout my lifetime, at least, the United Nations has seemingly become weaker and weaker and has no real authority over maintaining peace among sovereign nations in which it tries to be a mediator with. And they were founded, of course, in October 1945 and did not come close to meeting this criteria that Einstein felt was needed. He continued to flesh out his proposals in essays and interviews, and wrote an article called Atomic War or Peace. He suggested that at the time, the three great powers, the United States, Britain, and Russia, should jointly establish the new world government. But what happened was a divergence in democracy versus communism, so there was a fundamental ideological rift between these powers. They were never able to see eye to eye, still aren't today, and they would cede the monopoly on military power to a world government. But by then, the Cold War was well underway. Membership in a supranational security system should not be based on any arbitrary democratic standards, which was Einstein's way of trying to reconcile with that issue. He tried to resolve what right this world government would have to intervene in the internal affairs of nations. And he said it must be able to interfere in countries where a minority is oppressed by a majority. Where a minority is oppressed by a majority, citing Spain as an example. One must bear in mind that the people in Russia have not had a long tradition of political education, which is kind of a thrown shade, as the youth would say. Anywho, he goes on to try to explore those dynamics. Einstein's efforts to prevent future wars were motivated by his old pacifist instincts, but by his guilt. You know, whether or not it was true that he is the father of the atom bomb, in the public imagination, he was in some fundamental way, and he would have understood too that without his development of physics, this wouldn't have been possible. So in some way, he was complicit, right? So his feelings of guilt about the role he played in encouraging the atomic bomb project inspired him along this mission, which he dedicated the last decade of his life towards. And at a Manhattan dinner given by the Nobel Prize Committee in December 1945, he referenced the story which we all should know of the Nobel Prize itself, of Alfred Nobel, the inventor of dynamite. Sounds a lot like Oppenheimer, right? Or in this case, Einstein, maybe perhaps too. Today, the physicist, Einstein said, as he felt he was in a similar situation, the physicists who participated in forging the most formidable and dangerous weapon of all time are harassed by an equal feeling of responsibility, not to say guilt. So that's a little bit of that story of human history. and something to continuously consider as we try to figure out what the hell we're doing and how we progress forward, what we are progressing forwards to, and the future world that we all can create and live together. And so we don't destroy every damn thing that we know on this planet and try to look beyond Earth into the cosmos as well. So that's my little discussion on Einstein here today to continue this series that I've been publishing here on YouTube. I hope you enjoy, and if no one's watching this, then I hope future me enjoys listening back to my rambling ideas that I've been exploring here in 2025 December as we head towards 2026 and beyond into this wild world and future.